I would like to note the presence of my colleagues, the ambassadors from the coalition member states. We have Yemen, Sudan, Bahrain, Morocco. We are expecting a few more ambassadors to join us from Egypt, from Kuwait. Here is Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and أهلا وسهلا تفضل. And other members of the coalition. I will read a short statement and then I'll be happy to take your questions. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia took note of the annual Secretary General report on children and armed conflict issued on Friday, 6th of October 2017, which included the coalition to restore legitimacy in Yemen in the list of parties that have put in place measures aimed at improving the protection of children. The report praised the cooperation of the coalition led by Saudi Arabia and the United Nations in this regard. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia expresses its appreciation to the Secretary General's recognition of the important steps taken by the coalition and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to ensure the protection of children, and his acknowledgement of the continued cooperation between the coalition and the United Nations, and his expressed desire to deepen this engagement. While the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia expresses its welcome and appreciation, we reject the inaccurate and misleading information and figures contained in the report, and we express our strong reservation with respect to this information. At the same time, we reaffirm the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's and the members of the coalition respect for, commitment to, and compliance with all our obligations under the rules and principles of international law, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law. We exercise the maximum degree of care and precaution to avoid civilian harm. The regrettable effects of this conflict are a direct result of the Houthi and forces loyal to former President Saleh use of immoral and illegal actions that put the civilian population at risk, including using children as human shields, and their continued grave violations in this regard with impunity and no accountability. These heinous acts by the Houthis and their allies are committed to advance their goals and objectives in complete disregard to the sanctity of human life. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the coalition reaffirm that we are taking important measures to protect civilians during all military operations to end the suffering of the Yemeni people and minimize humanitarian cost. Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, thank you for doing this press briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. Both the Secretary General and the Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict have said that while the number of incidents by the coalition involving death and injuries to children have diminished from 2015, they're still too high and they need to be reduced. And quite a number of human rights groups have said that they want to know what specific additional measures the coalition is going to be taking to bring down these figures to a much, much lower level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very important question. First of all, let me assure you that one casualty is one casualty too many. So whatever the figure is, we would consider it too high because the place for children is at schools and playgrounds. It is not on the battlefield, and it is not where there can be casualties of war. So we continue to endeavor to reduce this number to the lowest possible level. And we do so by using various means, including refining the rules of engagement on a continuous basis. We have been doing that in consultation with the United Nations Unit for Protection of Children. We have also been active in investigating all alleged incidents that may have happened, and we have already covered many of them and concluded the investigation on them. And recently we have established, as was indicated by Madam Gamba in her briefing, the Child Protection Unit in the headquarters of the coalition, which is aimed at making sure that the practices of all the units and all the commands and operations of the coalition are carried out in a manner that helps protect children as much as possible. So we are trying to do our best in that regard, and we will need to continue to improve on our best. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I have two questions. I want to ask one in Arabic and one in English, if you allow me. The first question in English, if the phone call between Mr. Guterres and Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifin, the King of Saudi Arabia in Moscow 2 days ago, was related to the report or not. In Arabic, في الستيتمنت ذكرت معاليك انك ترفض المعلومات غير الصحيحة وغير الدقيقة في التقرير. هل يعني تعني فقط في اليمن أو في التقرير كامل؟ وإذا كان على اليمن ما هي الأشياء التي ترفضها وتعتقد أنها غير صحيحة والأرقام غير صحيحة؟ شكرا.
شكرا. أولا بالنسبة with regard to the phone call between the custodian of the two holy mosques and the Secretary General, I don't think that it would be appropriate for me to speak on the contents of those phone calls beyond what was announced by both sides. Both sides announced that the calls were comprehensive. They covered issues of mutual interest. First amongst them was the issue of Palestine and the continued effort by the Israelis to expand settlements in the occupied territory, especially in East Jerusalem. His Majesty expressed his serious concern in that regard and asked the Secretary General to intensify efforts to put an end to the activity of settlements anywhere in the occupied territory. They also talked about Syria, they talked about Libya, they talked about Yemen, they talked about Saudi Arabia's support for the international envoys' activities in these territories. So it was a wide range of discussions that covered Yemen as well as other places. بالنسبة للسؤال الثاني عن رفض المعلومات غير الصحيحة، بطبيعة الحال احنا يعني ما عندنا وسيلة للتحقق من صحة أو عدم صحة المعلومات مثلا في الكونغو أو في الصومال أو في أي مكان آخر. نحن نتحدث عن المنطقة التي ذكر فيها اسم التحالف، وهي عن العمليات التي تمت في اليمن. Yes, ma'am.
Evelyn Leopold, Huffington Post contributor. The ICRC has complained that it can't get its humanitarian aid in for the cholera problem in Yemen. And secondly, are any of the results of your investigations available anywhere? Because lots of us would love to see them. And there have been reports that you have bombed, or the coalition, not you personally, have bombed.
I hope not.
Schools, hospitals, and whatnot. Sometimes you get the feeling that the remedy is worse than the solution.
All right. ICRC cannot get humanitarian aid. I have no way of addressing that. I don't know what the specific situation is. I can assure you that as far as the coalition is concerned, we have not blocked any delivery of humanitarian aid material to the ICRC or any other humanitarian organization. To the contrary, we believe that the Houthis are blocking the deliveries of humanitarian aid from Aden, from Saudi Arabia, from other deliveries, and insist on the routes and the places where they have control, because they exercise collecting taxes and levies and bribes and what have you. As to the investigations are announced publicly. The results of the investigations are announced publicly as soon as they are concluded. I can tell you that almost to the best of my knowledge, 2/3 of all the cases have already been concluded and have been announced, 32 out of 50. With regards to bombing, schools and hospitals are off targets. They are in the list of prohibited targets. If a mistake happens, then it is covered by the investigation committee that we have talked about. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Abdelhamid Al-Siyam of Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Your Excellency, what do you think of the information listed in the report about the Houthi violation? Are those accurate? And only the inaccuracy refers to the coalition actions? The second, what do you think also of the system of reporting, the mechanism to get some information to the report? And finally, the report talks about a small unit just being established at the coalition headquarters to deal with the protection of children. Can you explain this small unit which has just been established? Thank you very much.
We believe the figures attributed to the Houthis are underrepresented for the same reasons that we believe the figures attributed to the coalition are overrepresented, because the same source that happens in Houthi-controlled territories from individuals and organizations that are associated with the Houthis and their allies are the same source that provides the information for this and for that. Therefore, we believe that it is underrepresented. Secondly, there are situations in which of recruitment of child soldiers in which the Houthis throw into battle large numbers of children to fight on their behalf. We believe that in such cases, if there are casualties, the responsibility actually lies with the party that has put them forward, while they should not have been put forward for battle. The small unit that you are talking about has been established in September. It consists at this stage of 3 officers. If there is headed by a colonel. If there is a need to expand it, it will be expanded. The Office of the Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict has undertaken to provide training manuals and training systems and so forth, and the intention is for that unit to monitor operations and make sure that all the necessary safeguards that are needed are actually followed in the various operations that are taken. Yes, sir.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coast for Access. Thanks, all 3 of you, for coming to the briefing. I wanted to a lot of the reliance that Ms. Gamba was putting on is on the ability of the coalition to investigate its own attacks. And there's been some criticism of the investigation. I wanted to ask you, this Joint Incidents Assessment Team, some of the criticism is that it's unwilling to say whose planes did which strikes, which obviously is, as a matter of international law, some people say they should do. They also have focused on a particular attack on August 25th in Sana'a and said that basically no one was held accountable for it. And so there seems, I mean, again, I don't expect the specifics, but as to like which country is doing what, maybe you or your co-briefers can address that. Maybe it should be done. Maybe it is being done. For example, what is Egypt's involvement in the coalition at this time? Just as one example. Thanks.
No, I would just answer your last question. Egypt, of course, we have some ships on the coast of Yemen to prevent arms smuggling. That's our role. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
And on the naming of whose planes do which strikes?
Well, I don't know how is that important. What is important is to make sure that the incident is investigated, and that if there is accountability, that accountability is attributed. That is more important than finding the nationality of the of the plane or of the pilot. But I do not take away from the importance of carrying the investigation to its full conclusion. And I believe that a record in which we have investigated 32 out of 50 cannot be considered a bad record, taking note of the fact that the investigation mechanism was started last year and is now building up its capability to address these incidents in a speedier manner. So I hope that would be the case.
Just one other thing: the UK Ministry of Defense, they have a different count of the number of strikes that they believe should be investigated. I guess I'm wondering, how did you arrive at the 50? How is it decided which air strikes? Is it anyone in which it's alleged that civilians died, or how is the 50 number come to? Thank you.
I think the 50 is all the strikes that have been reported to the GIAT, to the investigation mechanism. And as such, anyone who has a complaint can certainly do so. Let me take a question from the back. Yes, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. I just wanted to follow up, if you just bear with me for a moment, because I have a couple of questions. On the humanitarian aid delivery, follow on from Evelyn's question. You mentioned that you blame the Houthis for blocking some of the aid, but there's been suggestions that the coalition is blocking shipments before they even get close to any of the ports. So why is the coalition blocking and delaying shipments of humanitarian aid from reaching certain ports, and why was Sana'a Airport shut down to flights? And also the WFP cranes that were supposed to go to Hodeidah, why haven't they been allowed to be sent there to be set up? And what's the coalition doing to try and help combat the famine and the cholera that's spreading in Yemen? Thank you.
I can assure you that no shipment of humanitarian aid is being prevented from reaching Yemen by the coalition, or for that matter by the Yemeni government. Absolutely. We have given clearance to all such requests for docking by any ship that carries humanitarian aid to the people of Yemen. We are the largest contributor of aid to the people of Yemen, so it doesn't make sense for us to, on the one hand, be providing that aid and on the other hand be blocking it somewhere else. With regards to Sana'a Airport, I'm not sure that any of you, ladies and gentlemen, would want to fly from an airport that is controlled by an outlaw armed militia. I mean, that's what Sana'a Airport is. What the Yemeni government has said, which I think is reasonable, is that if the airport management is turned over to the administrative civilian administration system of Sana'a Airport, and if the necessary protection can be ensured for the operations of the airport, it can be reopened. It is now used on a selective basis for special flights, for emergency flights, and so forth. But can you imagine a plane full of passengers taking off from Sana'a Airport and God forbid, somewhere over Saudi Arabia or anywhere else in the world, something blows up here or there? I mean, who will bear the responsibility for that? So that's a very important point. With regards to the port and the issue of the cranes, I mean, with all due respect, I think that an issue is being made out of very little. There are how many ports in Yemen? 7 or 8? 9 ports in Yemen altogether. And there are 2 ports in Saudi Arabia, Jizan and Jeddah, one of which, Jizan, is closer to northern Yemen than Hodeidah is, and so forth. We have offered both ports, and we have offered to equip the other ports with cranes and the necessary equipment to increase their capacity. The emphasis by the Houthis on Hodeidah is very obvious. It's because it is the source of revenue. And where does that revenue go? Does it go to fight cholera? No. Who fights cholera in Yemen? Saudi Arabia. We are the ones who have provided the largest donation for fighting cholera and for fighting the other diseases. Does it go to pay salaries for the administrators of the port or the civil servants in Sana'a or Saada or anywhere else? No. doctors and nurses in these places have not received their salaries for months. So where does that revenue go? It goes to Iran to buy weapons and ammunition, or it goes somewhere in the pockets of the Houthi leaders who are becoming war traders, war kings in that regard.
And just a follow on, a quick follow on question.
Okay.
A quick
Yes.
follow on question. What about, is the coalition blocking any commercial shipments of food, medicine, or fuel?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. تفضل علي.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for Ali Barada from France 24 and An-Nahar newspaper. My question is whether this report is going to impact the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United Nations. Saudi Arabia and the coalition members have been generous to the UN humanitarian organs. Are these organs going to be affected by this kind of report? And what's your explanation to the numbers? Mrs. Gamba said this morning that those numbers speak for themselves about what's going on regarding those. So what's your response? Thank you.
Well, on the first question, relations between Saudi Arabia and the United Nations are very strong, and I hope that they will continue to be very strong, and I hope that they will continue to be on a cooperative joint basis. There is no benefit in speculating now as to what the impact of the report is going to be. We are talking to the United Nations, we are communicating with them, and I hope that we can overcome this issue by mutual understanding. The numbers I said at the beginning, one casualty is one casualty too many. And we should all strive to make sure that the number of casualties goes down, and we are committed to do so. Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador, all ambassadors. Pamela Falk from CBS News. I'd like to ask you about the last comment you made about reference to being the largest contributor on the cholera, and if you could give any numbers on that. But a big picture question, I'd like to follow up on Ali's, which is, needless to say, you were here, you know what happened last year with this report. This year, there's a more constructive attitude, and that's what you've said, and you've said it in your initial, you just said it again. Does that mean you're accepting the listing, the kingdom is listed on this, and intend to work with the UN on this, and therefore there won't be any cutoff of aid or anything in that sense? In other words, what changed, and has it actually changed? You've made a specific reference, but give us the bigger picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course it has changed, and it has changed in more than one way. First of all, last year there was very, very little consultation, almost nil, between us and the unit responsible for children and armed conflict. So we protested that. Secondly, there was a listing in a so-called blacklist or the bad guys list. This year we do not have that listing, so that's an important difference. Now we think that there is no justification whatsoever for the coalition to be listed anywhere, because we are conducting activities there in accordance with international legitimacy, in accordance with international law, in accordance with Resolution 2216. We are making an effort to try to preserve and protect children and all other civilians, and Mrs. Gamba has testified to that, so has the Secretary General. So there is no reason for that. Now, where do we go from there? We go back to the earlier question of Ali, and I would rather leave it at that at this point of time. Yes, sir. On the number, we've donated $67 million only for the cholera, other than our regular support with health and health products and so forth. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Ambassador. James Reinl with Middle East Eye. Like Pam's, another big picture question. It's not just that Saudi has again been listed on the UN's list of shame. You've got other problems at the moment. US lawmakers are working to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia over Yemen. You're back in court this month with the victims of 9/11 suing Riyadh. Back over in the Gulf, the GCC is fragmented. Is this a crisis moment for the kingdom?
Not at all. Not at all. The kingdom has the support of all of its friends and allies, including the United States, including our Arab friends and brothers in the region and elsewhere. Today, the range of friends and allies and members of the coalition is greater than ever. Our relations with the United States is better than ever before. The question about the legal cases, well, the court system is open to everybody. They can contest their claims, and we will defend our position. So no, not at all. We don't feel any loss of support from our friends and allies and brothers. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for the briefing. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al-Arab Al-Jadid newspaper. I have two questions. The first one is regarding what you said about children and that they belong to their places in schools. But as a matter of fact, on the report, there is the issue of targeting schools. So how do you explain this? And
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat that?
There's the issue of that the coalition targeted schools. How you explain this? And you talked about accountability. Would you elaborate on that? And if there's anybody who was, if there are any measures that we're taking on this regard by your side? Thank you.
Well, with regards to the first question, schools, as I said, are off targets, are on the list of prohibited targets. There are cases in which schools have been converted into military headquarters or warehouses for ammunition or whatever. If that happens, then the school loses its designation as a school and it becomes a legitimate military target. But generally speaking, schools are off limit and they are in the prohibited list of targets. Second part of your question was?
About the accountability, and if you can give us examples for being people were held accountable.
Part of the GIAT process is finding responsibility and attributing it and processing that through the legal systems of the military. Usually the legal systems of the military are not conducted in the public eye. They are done in a manner that protects the military confidentiality and military traditions, but there is accountability and there is a record in the kingdom of who was responsible for that. In some cases it was even announced, maybe not without specific names, but it was announced that a certain person of a certain rank was found accountable and was taken to task by the relevant authorities. Let me see if there are other questions. All right, then I'll come back to Matthew.
It's actually just it's an open-ended question on the Human Rights Council and the new body they created. I know that there was extensive negotiation and lobbying. Some people feel it was watered down in such a way that it may not be as useful as it might have been in terms of the information. I'm sure your view is different, but how do you think? What do you feel the outcome is positive? Would you have preferred no resolution? Just what can you say about the process in Geneva?
Well, you know the process anywhere in Geneva or here in New York. Whenever there is a resolution that is being worked on, there is never 100% satisfaction of all parties. Somebody is going to have to give. But this is the spirit of the United Nations. It is the spirit of give and take. It is the spirit of negotiations. It is the spirit of understanding the other's points of views and probably trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and so forth. So if we are not satisfied with the outcome, that's natural. Nor are some of the other parties, and we have to live with that and work with it. Yes, sir.
Yes, Joseph Klein of Canada Free Press. I want to ask you something that's related but not exactly directly on point with Yemen, and that does relate to Iran. You had mentioned that some revenues might have been siphoned off to help enrich Iran for its various aggressive actions. Would you have any comment on the distinct possibility that the Trump administration may decertify Iran's compliance with the JCPOA and move in a somewhat different direction with regard not only to that specific nuclear deal, but re-examining the whole relationship with Iran, sort of more in line with, I think, the way Saudi Arabia sees the issue. Can you comment on that?
Well, we don't have a specific comment on the joint agreement between the 5+1 and Iran. That is not for us to comment on, but we can certainly say that the behavior of Iran does not reflect the behavior of a responsible member of the international community, which was expected to be the case following the signature of this agreement. It was expected that Iran will now come into the community of civilized nations and act accordingly. That does not seem to be happening. They continue to interfere in the internal affairs of neighboring states, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Yemen, and others, Syria, of course. And they continue to use bellicose language and conduct ballistic missile testing. So if the United States or if any other government in the world recognizes that fact and aligns its policies in a manner that puts a check on these practices, then we are all for it. Yes, تفضلي.
Raghida Dargham. Ambassador, when the coalition states its case in Yemen, they say that it's upon the invitation of the legitimate government that the coalition is there. The same thing happens in Syria when Russia and Iran are referred to, and the roles in Syria. It's said that they are there by the invitation of the government. Now, is there any parallel in your view, or any reflection, or any equal reflection in the report regarding both parties? I mean, obviously they took you on as coalition, and I'm wondering if you feel, or did you discuss with them, why the Russian and Iranian component is not addressed in Syria when it comes to children of Syria?
Not at all. There is absolutely no parallel. Legitimacy is not a piece of paper, and it is not a word, and it is not an empty concept or an empty slogan. Legitimacy stems from the right to represent the people. When you have 500,000 people having been killed by government forces, when you have millions of people having been displaced inside and outside the country, when you have had the kind of suffering that the Syrian people have agonized under for 6 or 7 years now, for all practical purposes, the Syrian government has lost its legitimacy and cannot cling to a piece of paper or to a nameplate that says it is the legitimate government of Syria. That is different from the situation in Yemen, completely different. Legitimacy in Yemen is supported by a Security Council resolution 2216. In Syria, there is another Security Council resolution that calls for transition from the current government. There is absolutely no way you can compare the two.
The question is about the report itself and referring to victims, children who are victims in Yemen and in Syria. Did you find any discrepancy in the fact that there is no equal blame on the government of Russia, for example, or Iran for whatever possibly has been done to the Syrian children?
Well,
did you raise this with the United Nations?
You would have to address that question.
But did you raise it?
No,
did you?
No.
Why not? Why did you not raise that?
Because we discussed with them the part that relates to the coalition in Yemen. That's the part in which we are directly involved. The rest of it is up to the international community to handle. Yes, sir.
ممكن أسأل بالعربي سعادة السفير، هل لديكم أي تعليق على الجزء المخصص لموضوع الأطفال في فلسطين وفي الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة وإسرائيل؟ أي تعليق؟
I have not studied it لم أدرس هذا الجزء بشكل كامل حتى أستطيع أن أعطيك عليه تعليق. Thank you very much.